Yeah.
All right, Linda, I think we're ready. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and all right. Welcome, everyone. I am Phoenix. My name's Phoenix, and I'm the creator of this series, Ecotherapy for Everyone, Healing for Peace and Justice. I'm an ecotherapist, a social worker, and a human trying to make it through the chaos of life. Before we start, a couple of things. I want to acknowledge where I am living, and I am in Oakland, California, Northern California. And I am living on Ohlone land. The indigenous people of this place are the Ohlone people. And I want to give thanks to them for letting me be a guest here. And I just want to take a minute before we start, because we're all dealing with a lot in the world, no matter where we are. Some of us more extreme than others, but to just take a moment for us to just kind of breathe together and gather our forces here together from all over the world. And I just want to give thanks right now to the ancestors and my ancestors that made it possible for me to be alive today and to be able to do this work, and the sacrifices they made in this country, where on this land where I live. And also a lot of people are suffering and passing away right now because of COVID. You might have some people in your life that have passed away. And so I just want to take a minute to honor all of our ancestors, and to those recent ancestors who may have passed away. I actually, one of my neighbor next door, her husband passed away from COVID, complications from COVID on Sunday. So a lot of people are losing loved ones. And I think it's important that we just take a moment to honor the ancestors and those that are transitioning at this time, in this very chaotic time. So just a moment of silence, please. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So how are things going to flow today? So I'm going to let you know. So we want you to please hold your questions until the end. You can also write them in the chat and we'll get to them in the end. I am so honored to have our very first presenter be someone who's been very supportive of me as an ecotherapist, someone who is an elder in the field. And one of the things that I really love about my experience of ecotherapy here in the United States and where I live is that there's so many women, elder women, who are the leaders in the field. You know, we love youth and we know it's important to support the youth, but I think right now, the times that we're living in, elder women are the ones that are holding space for a lot of us and guiding us, navigating us through the chaos and the climate change and everything. And I'm very grateful that in this field, there are a lot of women, elder women, who are taking the torch and leading us all and helping us heal during these times. So Linda Buzzell is an elder in the field. She's been practicing for over a couple decades. Many of you may know her books. She is Canadian by birth, but is in Southern California, and she can tell more about who she is. But I just want to give thanks for her offering her wisdom and her time, and she just has such a joyful spirit every time I connect with her to today. So I'm going to ask people if you can please stop your video, because we all have different bandwidths, so that we can focus on Linda and the presentation. And then I'm going to share a screen and Linda will start. And then let me, I'm admitting people at the same time.
Can you go back?
All right, I'm trying to hide the side, but I don't know if it's gonna, there it is. How's that, Linda?
Looks good, thank you.
All right, take it away.
Okay, I just want to welcome everyone. And I want to thank Phoenix so much for creating this great gathering and this great lecture series. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing her lecture later on. So this basic talk today is just going to open some of the doors in terms of the story of ecotherapy, where we come from, hopefully some ideas of where we're going. As Phoenix mentioned, I was born and grew up in Canada on Mohawk land, and I'm grateful to have been able to have that experience. Excuse me, and I'm now living on Chumash land in Santa Barbara, California, and very grateful for some of the teachings that I had the privilege of attending from some of the Chumash elders here. And I think the rest of this you probably all are familiar with. One thing you might not have heard of is that the Canadian Ecopsychology Network has a series called Ecopsychology Voices. And that is free and available to everyone in case you haven't discovered it. So let's start on the next slide.
Yep, 1 second. Ah. There we go.
There we go, okay. So I wanted to start with Indigenous wisdom because probably the most important thing to know about ecotherapy and nature healing practices is this is nothing new. This is as ancient as the human race is. And we've just kind of forgotten it and we're just beginning to rediscover it. So I wanted to start off by acknowledging that the Indigenous wisdom is the root of ecotherapy. And it's grounded in the deep truth that humans are an integral part of the whole of nature. In some ways, when you think about this, it's so obvious. How could we ever have forgotten it? But we have, unfortunately, in many places. So that's where we need to ground our ecotherapy practice, even today, is that we are an integral part of the whole of nature. Some people call it interconnection. Some people call it interbeing. That's sort of the Buddhist term for it. And honoring this spiritual connection with land, with ancestors, with the community of all beings, I think is the core of any practice of ecotherapy. So that's why I wanted to start here. And the next slide, it gets into this whole issue of where did we lose this? How did that even happen? And I won't be able to go into this completely deeply today because we don't have time, but I at least want to have a little bit of exploration of it, because how are we going to fix it if we don't know where the mistakes started? So we're looking at where did this big lie happen, this idea, this delusion that humans are somehow separate from and superior to the rest of nature. That seems to be the core mistake that's been made. And Gabrielle Malonic, who is a depth, excuse me, a depth psychologist and eco-psychologist, came up with this word misophysis that I just wanted to throw in here. We know about this is from the Greek. Miso is like misogyny. It has to do with hatred. So misogyny is the hatred of women. Misophysis is the hatred of the physical world, our own physicality. So it's the hatred of nature and of all beings and people who are seen as natural. And I think this word is really helpful for us because so much of what's wrong with the world can actually be traced back to this thing called misophysis. And you can see it in the hatred of the body in cultures like some parts of Europe, the hatred of our own bodies, the hatred of human body, plant bodies, animals' bodies, land, the earth's body, hatred of natural processes. These are all parts of the ways where we got off track. And as I mentioned, we won't be able to get into all of where this came from, but this list that you see right now is part of what everybody's starting to discuss. It's like, where did we go wrong? When did this happen? Is it recent? Is it far back? Some people are arguing that the domestication of plants and animals, even in prehistory, is part of the problem, that we started basically enslaving plants and animals and just using them for our own purposes. And a Chumash elder here in the area that I live in Southern California talked to me about how the Chumash view this. They don't garden, or they didn't garden like we garden. They would find plants that were useful to humans in the wild, and they would tend them in the wild. That is so different from classic European gardening. And they would tend them in the wild, but then when they harvested, let's say they were looking for chia seeds, they would never take the whole plant. They would leave the plant there, and they would take some of the seeds that they needed for the humans to eat, and they would leave some of the seeds for the animals and for the plant itself to regenerate. And when she told me this, I'm a gardener, and this totally blew my mind. It really took me a while to understand it, how different the philosophy is underlying that way of looking at plants and animals. So this is part of why some people feel that this is the beginning of where we went wrong, was just enslaving plants and animals. Other people feel like it was patriarchy. It's the way we treat women. As you know, women are part of nature that's lesser somehow. So that seems like maybe where we went off track. Other people feel that it's racism and slavery. Not only have we enslaved animals, but other peoples, and the whole rise of the toxicity that we call racism in so many places. Other people thought, no, it's when we started to live in cities. That's where we went wrong. Other people say, oh, it's the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is responsible for everything that went wrong in Europe. And of course, a lot did go wrong in Europe. And still other people have felt that it's religions, that there are religions that have dominated, that have advocated the domination of nature. So here in the West, we could go back to Christianity and the idea that God created the rest of nature so that man could be in charge of it and use it and whatever and abuse it. So there's been a lot of that kind of talk within the world of eco-spirituality, and many religions are actually updating themselves and greening themselves to sort of get beyond this idea that the rest of nature is just here for us to use and abuse. Other people have talked about colonization by Europeans and genocide. And of course, we're talking about the deaths of many indigenous peoples and cultures and the theft of land, all of that huge issue that we're still dealing with. Still other people have said, no, we can't go back that far. Let's start from the rise of industrialization in the West, in England, in the 1800s or the 1700s, and the rise of capitalism. Maybe that's where we really got off track. And I don't pretend that we're going to solve this problem today. I think it's going to be really a while before we figure more of this out. But I just wanted you to know that this is what we're doing as ecotherapists. We're trying to figure out where we went wrong and then to see what we can do about making things right again. So the next slide. So what you're involved with and I'm involved with and everybody in ecopsychology and ecotherapy is the exciting idea of rediscovering nature therapy in the West, and ecopsychology, the understanding of the human-nature relationship. And it all involves the recovery from what I'm calling the big lie, and many others have called it that as well. And just to remind you, that's the idea that humans are separate from and superior to the rest of nature, that we're in recovery from this. And another thing that's been at the root of ecotherapy and ecopsychology is this idea that in the absence of a healthy planet, there can be no human health, either physical or mental. So basically, we have to break down these artificial ideas that somehow we're separate from the rest of nature. So we can trash the rest of nature, we can totally impoverish and pollute the rest of the planet, and somehow humans are magically not going to suffer. That we're somehow separate, we're better, and nature can be really, really sick, and we can still be totally healthy. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's just completely crazy thinking. And that's what we need to really recover from. Okay. So a little bit of history here, not too much, I promise you. I just want to start coming up to the present day with, when did this whole idea begin to really catch hold that ecopsychology and ecotherapy could be real things, and that they could be something that you and I could get involved with? So in the early 1990s, Theodore Roszak, a cultural historian, excuse me, who came up with the phrase counterculture, that's what he's famous for, he wrote The Voice of the Earth, which is really one of the very first books calling this field ecopsychology. And then this beautiful anthology came out in 1995 from Sierra Club Books, with lots of great stuff for many, many people. And I have a copy of it right here. And it was some really interesting ideas about what would it look like if we married ecology and psychology. How could that look? And we had everybody from Paul Shepard, who's one of the ancestors of our field, to Joanna Macy, Leslie Gray. I mean, there's a lot of great people in here. Robert Greenway is one of the founders of Wilderness Therapy. Ralph Metzner, who wrote the book Green Psychology, and Chellis Glendinning, who wrote a great book called I'm Chellis and I'm in Recovery from Western Civilization. I figured she said the whole thing in that title. So if you haven't had a chance to peruse this, I certainly recommend it. And on the right here, I just wanted to mention that one of the most important essays in this book was by Carl Anthony on ecopsychology and the deconstruction of whiteness. Now, Carl Anthony was obviously way ahead of his time here, and we really need to deal with this issue of environmental justice. And I know there will be some great lectures further on in the series by Phoenix and other people that are really going to help us do this. But I want to put Carl Anthony right here in history so that we know who he is and what he's talking about. And the next slide. So the first book that I know of with the title Ecotherapy is this one on the left, which is really a core text in our field for all of us who are wanting to be ecotherapists. It's by Howard Clinebell, and it's about healing ourselves, healing the earth. And he was a pastoral counselor, and he was really one of the first people to take us from the understanding of ecopsychology into the actual practice that some people call applied ecopsychology, which is ecotherapy. So talking about ancestors, I think we need to give a nod to Howard Clinebell. And what's interesting for me about him is he actually lived about 8 blocks from where I'm sitting now. And I had no idea that's where he lived, unfortunately, till after he passed away. So there must be something in the air or the land here that is definitely ecotherapy minded. So the middle book is an anthology that Craig Chalquist and I put together in 2009. And it's meant to be sort of a follow-up to this original eco-psychology book that was published by Sierra Club Books. And Sierra Club Books published this one as well. So we wanted to have like both books, one on eco-psychology and one on ecotherapy. And of course, there's a lot more going on. This is not stopping. This is just the beginning. Ecotherapy, the third book on the right there, Theory, Research, and Practice, comes from the UK. I think it's the University of Brighton, by the late Martin Jordan and Joe Hines. And again, full of great essays from people in the field. And Martin Jordan was a very important person in our field. And he helped really organize and advance our understanding of what ecotherapy really is. So I'm very grateful to him. And the next slide. So don't panic, you don't have to read any of this. All you need to know from this slide is the top part, which says research supports us. There is now a huge body of research that shows that many, many different kinds of nature contact are really provably healing for many different conditions. And actually, Craig Chalquist did a whole back section of the book that he and I did just on the research. And he likes to joke that there's now more evidence that ecotherapy works than there is evidence that psychotherapy works. So it just shows you. And
I love that.
yeah, I love that too. It's like, I think it makes sense though. And we'll get into why it makes sense. Because, you know, we're geared to be in contact with the rest of nature. But it's been a shock for people in the West to look at this research. And all of the research that I've read since I got into this field, I haven't read one study that didn't show that contact with some aspect of the rest of nature was healing for one or more of these different conditions, which I think is astonishing. I mean, you'd think there'd at least be one or two studies that said, well, you know, we don't think it's really working. No, it just keeps working, everybody that does these studies. So let me just mention some of the ones that I have on the screen here. The first study, Pretty et al., comes out of the University of Essex in the UK. And throughout the whole 2000s, they did a whole series of research studies that basically showed that exercise outside in green nature, so a walk in green nature, was as effective an antidepressant for mild to moderate depression as antidepressant medication. Now, you may wonder why this was of such interest in the UK, and I know we have some people here who can probably tell us more about this, but one thing for Americans to remember is that the UK has a National Health Service that is taxpayer funded. So what was happening is the NHS was apparently getting larger and larger bills for psychiatric medication for depression. And when they saw these studies, they said, wait, you mean all we have to do is prescribe people going outside in green nature and they get better and it doesn't cost us anything? And the answer was yes. And that's the reason they did so many of these studies, because they couldn't believe it. They even did one study. Somebody said, well, you know, it's the exercise. It's not really green nature. It's the exercise that's working, all the endorphins and everything. So they did another study where they compared people walking in a mall, an urban mall, and people walking outside in green nature. And guess what? The people became more depressed, not less. So for all of you who've been practicing retail therapy, not going to work. So this has been really an important thing. And it also led to the expansion of training for ecotherapists in the UK, excuse me, which is why Martin Jordan and other academics in the UK were actually involved in ramping up the training, because if you suddenly realize that, no, we're not going to do medication, we're going to do green things outdoors, suddenly we need trained ecotherapists, and there weren't any. So that's why we had to invent that. And as you probably all know, this is a very young field. We're all pioneers, and we're kind of just inventing it as we go along. So these next two on the slide, I put here because I wanted you to see that some of this research is pretty hardcore. These two studies come out of Stanford, and they're studying really neuropsychological things like cognitive function, and the bottom one, nature experience reduces rumination and subgenual prefrontal. It's like, I want you to know this is getting serious. And there's a reason that not only ecotherapists, but also medical professionals and doctors are offering now park prescriptions, outdoor prescriptions, green nature prescriptions, because frankly, the science is telling us that this is what we need to do. So bottom line, the research is there. Okay, the next one. Sorry about my voice, by the way. As you probably, many of you know, we've been struggling here with smoke. So I still have some smoky voice. I think we need to go one back. One more.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think one more.
One more?
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
That's it? Okay.
So we've got this research that's showing us that nature contact works, which brings up the obvious question, why? And I can only give you my theory on this because I haven't read any studies that are definitive on this, but to me it seems pretty obvious that we human animals evolved in daily contact with the rest of nature. It's like, duh, this is who we are as animals. And we were apparently right there between the trees and the forest and the savannas. That's who we are by evolution. And maybe we up here have forgotten about that, but our bodies, our souls have not. So that I think any connection with what Carl Jung called the $10 million person inside of us recognizes, it just wakes us up. And we go, oh, okay, I remember this somewhere. Maybe not even from my lifetime, but I remember it. And the reason I have a picture here of a caged tiger is I really think that's who we are as modern people. And you know how it is with caged animals in zoos, that they can become depressed, they get mental illnesses, they get physical illnesses. I mean, it's such an unnatural habitat for zoo animals. And more biologists have been finally coming to understand this is cruel and unusual punishment, taking an animal out of its natural habitat and caging it. And there's a lot of videos online that I love to watch of animals that have been caged for whatever reason, and sometimes it's to take care of them when they've been wounded. But when those cages open and the animals rush out of that cage and they smell the air, they smell the trees, the plants, they see other animals, it's just pure joy. There's one I especially love that is of cows in the north, where cows have been indoors in the barn all winter. And they open up the barn, and you know, these are middle-aged cows, and they rush out and they're jumping like they're calves, and they're just loving that fresh grass. I mean, you can see that this is a form of animal joy that we human animals have exactly the same thing within our bodies too. So this is what Richard Louv called nature deficit disorder. He came up with this title in his best-selling book, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And of course, it's not only kids who are suffering nature deficit disorder. But if you look at the picture on the lower left, it's like we've caged ourselves. We literally lock ourselves up. And of course, it's even worse now with the COVID thing where so many of us are locked in our little apartments. But even at work, I mean, we're in these cubicles, we're indoors, we're staring at screens all day. It's making us sick. And it's a basic question in ecotherapy. Is the way you're living what's making you sick? And I usually do what I call a time diary with clients, where I ask them to keep track for a whole week of the hours that they spend indoors under fluorescent light or artificial light, and the amount of, or on screens, and the amount of time that they're getting in natural light or they're outdoors in the rest of nature. And it's often really shocking to people to realize that we have caged ourselves. We've, some people call it, we've domesticated ourselves, and that we're really suffering from this. Okay, the next one. So I promised we'd get back to Carl Anthony, and this is where I want to mention again the importance of this idea of social justice, environmental and social justice, because of all this research we've talked about and how we've all gotten caged, that equal access to healthy, non-polluted green and blue nature is a human right and a health necessity. So this is where we have to realize that no, it's not okay for humans to be in situations where the air is polluted, the water's polluted, environment, our food, everything is polluted, and we have no way of getting outdoors, we have no parks, we have no trees, we have no access to either green or blue nature, and that is a human right. And I believe that the UN is now, either has or is going to adopt this. So I've got my fingers crossed on that one. Okay. So people often ask this question of, okay, Indigenous wisdom is great, but how am I going to recover Indigenous wisdom? You know, for 20 generations back, everybody's been living in cities or living this whole unnatural way of life. What does that even mean? And I want to mention this book here because Peggy Ayers has done a really interesting job of exploring what this means, especially for people who have no Indigenous connection, at least that they know of. Now, obviously, all of us, if we go far enough back, we all have Indigenous ancestors. And at one point in our history, somewhere, we lived according to Indigenous philosophy. So even if it's many generations back, it's worth really exploring your own ancestry, your own genealogy, your own DNA, whatever it is, and getting a sense of what the people who are way behind you, where they lived, what their way of understanding their contact with nature was before whenever it was that the big lie showed up in that particular culture. Now the trick here is we can't rip off anybody else's Indigenous culture. And this has been one of the problems in ecotherapy that we've been working on for a while, because in particular, people of European extraction, we've gotten pretty desperate to find any kind of Indigenous ways of functioning because it's so far back for many of us, and that we don't even know the history or the prehistory of what our ancestors were doing. But it's not okay for us to decide, well, we're going to do a Native American vision quest, or we're going to use a dream catcher from Native Americans, or we're going to use something from Africa, or we're going to use something from wherever, if that's not our Indigenous ancestors. So this just is an important thing that we're just struggling with right now. We know there's wonderful Indigenous wisdom, we're desperate for it, but we can't just steal it the way we've stolen land, or, you know, without dealing with the way that Indigenous people have and continue to be treated in the world. And this again is an issue that's being dealt with in the United Nations, which is great. There's a lot of new recognition there of the importance and power of Indigenous peoples and the wisdom that they have for the rest of us who are royally screwing up. So we may talk about that more. I'm happy to have a little discussion about that once the slideshow's over. And the next one. So now we're going to talk about the practical part of, well, how do you do it? What do we do? And it's really simple. There's many different ways of connecting with nature that work. Because as I mentioned in the little section on research, I don't know of any nature connection method so far, if it's been done properly, that didn't provide some healing benefit to at least some group of people. So what I advise people to do is identify the thing that gives you joy, the thing that really you connect with through your own history, through your own practices. And I put this one first because I'm a plant person. I love plants. So this just works out to be a really good way for me to engage with ecotherapy. Where I'm sitting, you can't see out that window, but I actually have a permaculture backyard food forest on a suburban lot. It's not very big, but it's got hundreds of fruit trees and bushes and all kinds of different things on it. It looks like a bit of a jungle, but I use it as my ecotherapy office. That works great for me, and it works good for clients if they're comfortable wandering around outside in my backyard. So it doesn't take a whole backyard to do this. Sometimes it can be plants that you have in your office. I see that Phoenix has got some nice plants. Even something that you grow on a windowsill. You know, I just learned how to take the bottoms off of green onions and then put them in a pot and stick them on the windowsill and they'll regrow. Wow. It's like there's all kinds of things we can do no matter who we are. And even if we're in the middle of the city, we're on the 20th floor, there's things that we can do. Now there is a whole established field called horticultural therapy. And if this interests you, just look it up. There's a horticultural therapy associations, and you can get trainings, you can learn things.
The guys out there.
Pardon?
The guy.
Yeah, so really there's lots and lots of good things that you can do if plants are your thing. Okay, the next one. So this is about ecotherapy in green and blue places, like we talked about. So there's a lot of these, and I'm sure we'll discuss them more. There's any kind of forest, we just love it. This is where we evolved. We love our forests. Forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, is becoming really a big thing now. Anything to do with parks, anything to do with water. People are talking about Blue Mind. There's a book about that and how just being connected to water is very healing. And then there's the whole issue of getting involved with wilder places, or what we call wilderness. And I'm putting those little quotation marks there because there's a whole big ferment going on here in North America, because it turns out, guess what? There was no wilderness here. There was human managed land. And when Europeans showed up, unfortunately, of course, there had been this horrible spread of disease, which we had brought with us all across the native nations in this in Turtle Island. And basically whole groups of people had died off. So the people who had been tending certain places were no longer there, or there was genocide, or there was warfare, and people were not able to tend the places. And frankly, we started stealing them as we moved west. And we couldn't understand why John Muir, of all people in San Francisco, couldn't understand why these wonderful places that he was trying to protect were degenerating. And it wasn't until, gosh, fairly recently that a scientist at the University of California helped us understand that what was going on was these were human managed places, forests, wilderness, only it wasn't wilderness. And that once the people were not there to tend it, it began degenerating. And guess what? Then what happened was the Europeans decided, well, we better tend it. So there's a long, complicated, and a little scary, not too happy history of wilderness in North America that we have to keep in mind. And one thing that those who do this work really need to be cognizant of is if you're doing wilderness therapy or outdoor therapy of any kind, the first thing that we need to do is acknowledge whose land that we're doing it on. And many times that's unceded land, meaning that by treaty that land continues to belong to people other than the people currently there. And it's been a mistake that some ecotherapists have made, that you can just plunk an ecotherapy group down anywhere and never mention the history of that land or the peoples of that land. So these are all things that we're trying to get better about as part of our ecotherapy practice. And the bottom one here is just really simple, just taking a lot of activities that we have done indoors and taking them outdoors. And isn't it interesting that with COVID, they're telling us, don't go to the gym, go to a park. And it's turning out, of course, you guessed it, the research shows that doing exercise or meditation or whatever outdoors is actually more healing than doing it indoors. So no reason we shouldn't keep moving outdoors. All right, then there's this whole wonderful field of animal facilitated ecotherapy. And just like these other areas, there's all this good stuff, and then there's stuff we're trying to work on. So obviously, therapy dogs. Therapy dogs have been with us since Sigmund Freud had his dog Jody, I think it was called, in his sessions, which he never told us, right? But he did. We have photographs to prove it. So this idea of having a dog in with you if you're doing therapy or any kind of a session with people, it's not new, but we're rediscovering it. When I was doing therapy out of my house when I was living in Santa Monica, I had a dog that was always in the room with me, and oh, it was amazing. I mean, especially working with kids or working with people who were in grief or trauma. There was that, first of all, Cookie was amazing. She knew what was going on, and when people were hurting, and she would go to them, and they would just instinctively start touching her, petting her. And now we know from the studies that have been done that your blood pressure goes down, your anxiety level goes down. I mean, it's profoundly healing to be in contact with animals. And you can see this picture down at the left here about therapy dogs with veterans. I mean, therapy dogs are being used in many, many, many situations now. The important thing about all of this is that we can't just think about it from our point of view, that we're just going to use any animal, any place, any plant, and we're not going to have to care about what the animal has to say about it, or the plant, or whatever, the space. So, especially with dogs, because dogs are so tuned in to humans, I think it's really important to check in with the dog and see where they're at that particular day. Do they want to do this kind of work? And the people who train therapy dogs, thankfully, are pretty smart about this. They really do test a lot of dogs and see which dogs seem to really like this kind of work and have a talent for it, and not force dogs that don't like this kind of work to do it, because it's intense. They even have cats. You wouldn't think cats could be therapy cats, but they can. And I discovered this a while back when a colleague of mine was going through trauma, and I was recommending ecotherapy. She said, ecotherapy, that's not for me. I'm a city gal. I'm not into, going outside in green places. And I said, but what about your kitties? And she said, oh, my baby. She just absolutely loves these 2 cats that she has. And unfortunately, she had a trauma happen to her, and those cats literally got her through it. So even indoors, animal facilitated therapy can be really, really powerful. And I was very grateful that she had those kitties. They really saved her. So I wanted to talk about horses here. because there's an argument going on within the equine assisted therapy or equine facilitated therapy community now about, is it okay for us to use horses, and I use that word use, that's always a red flag, that, you know, where people just sit on top of the horse, whether the horse is in the mood or not, or whether we should have a whole different kind of equine assisted therapy. And the photograph on the right is from Netta DeMaio, who wrote something for our book and runs a great place called Return to Freedom. And her idea is that this kind of therapy should include free horses connecting with free people. In other words, we shouldn't just be taking people into some situation where they can sit on a very domesticated horse. But she's got horses there that you can see they're living wild. They're living in herds. They run their own lives. And then it becomes really extra special when one of those horses decides to come over and interact with you. That's way different than some animal that's being led by a leash over to you and they have no choice. So we're really beginning to see that we have to have a circle of reciprocal healing here, or this really doesn't work. And finally, wild animals that we meet. This is all part of animal facilitated ecotherapy. So let's say you're out on a walk in the woods, nearby woods, with a client, and then suddenly a certain bird shows up, and you can kind of inquire as to, does that have any particular resonance for the client? Does that mean anything? If bluebird shows up, what does that mean? And it's amazing how often when you do this, that there is something. There's something that touches the person you're working with, where even if it's a hummingbird, or it's a lizard, or it's just some kind of animal that shows up, even an insect, that deepens the connection, and deepens the conversation with what's going on. Okay. So I get asked this question a lot. When I was practicing psychotherapy in Los Angeles, I worked in a windowless room with fluorescent lights. Can you imagine? And I was trying to do ecotherapy. Gotta be impossible, right? Well, this is some stuff that I and other therapists have learned the hard way. That even if there's nothing you can change, even if you're working in some kind of clinic situation where they force you to working in particular circumstances, there are things you can do. And the first one is nature photos or paintings. And dentists and doctors have discovered this because, of course, there is research showing it works. Even a picture on the wall will actually help. Again, lowering blood pressure, relaxing people. It's exactly why when you're in the dentist chair, look right in front of you or look at the ceiling and you'll see if they're good, they've got some kind of nature photograph up there because they know it's going to lower your anxiety level. If you're bothered by sounds, it's really great to have one of these little indoor fountains. That's kind of a white noise, but it's also kind of a nature hit. And even like what Phoenix did for us at the beginning, having sounds of birds or a little bit of nature sound, very subtle, it absolutely works. Because again, it's like our body recognizes it. Even if our conscious mind is not aware of it, our body recognizes it. This is our home. And then on the left here is something that I started doing in this windowless office, is I would bring things in from my garden, whether it was a flower or fruit or stone or feather, and I would ask people if they resonated with anything that was in the tray, and they would often pick something out and a whole story would come out. Why did you pick that stone? Well, you know, there's always a story, right? That's part of what we do as ecotherapists, is we get into people's stories. So that's one way to stimulate that, even if you're indoors. Okay. So obviously there's many forms of ecotherapy. I probably won't get through all of them here, but just want to mention somatics, dance therapy. The Earth Body Institute is one place to go and check out information there, because Ariana Candel, who runs it, is a former dance and movement therapist. I think she still is, actually. I shouldn't say former. And she's combined that with ecotherapy. There's outdoor art therapies. Maybe you're an art therapist or you love using the arts. It all works. Any connection with any aspect of the rest of nature should give you a positive result. Okay, the next one. So now we're going to talk about the many ways you can practice ecotherapy and nature therapy. So you don't have to be a psychotherapist or a counselor or a coach, but there is a new field that they're calling eco-psychotherapy, which is for those people who have a particular license. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. There's licensed social workers, licensed occupational therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. There's many people who have licenses of some kind. And we have particular issues because we have to do things within our scope of practice of our license. And so those people often get together and talk about all these licensing and insurance and all that other stuff that they have to deal with. And they share practices that relate to traditional psychotherapy plus ecotherapy, and how does that fit together. But you don't have to be a psychotherapist at all, or a counselor. There are nature guides, there are educators, there are coaches who are not licensed in any way. There's youth workers, health and wellness professionals, anybody who has any kind of health and wellness license or practice. This can be included in your practice. And then we shouldn't forget community leaders and spiritual leaders. And I'm sure I'm leaving some people out here. So I hope that you're going to mention this when we start to interact, and you can let me know if there's more umbrellas under which you can practice ecotherapy. Okay.
1 second. A little stuck. 1 second.
So we talked about the many ways you can practice and the many people that can practice. But now we're going to talk about the many conditions that ecotherapy has been shown to help with. And I just want to say that this is not a complete list. And there are many more conditions that absolutely are, every time we do research, we're showing, oh, it works for this. So stress, anxiety, depression, autism, PTSD, as far as I know, people are using it for COVID. I know they're using it for cancer recovery, ADD, ADHD, addictions, learning disabilities, community grief, community eco-anxiety. I don't know of anything it can't be used for. Bringing whatever we're doing in terms of healing into nature changes everything, because of course nature is the ultimate therapist. In ecotherapy, the therapist or guide or coach is a catalyst, and the actual healer is Mother Nature herself, which totally changes the dynamics in terms of working this way.
So Linda, we're at 3 o'clock right now.
Okay, I think I've got about 3 slides left. By about 3:05, I should be done, I hope. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention is one size doesn't fit all. So you need to customize your ecotherapy to the person you're working with. So wilderness therapy is not for everybody. Working with animals isn't for everybody. But you need to get your client's ecobiography or earth story up front. You need to hear where they were brought up, where it was for them, for kids, as kids. And you need to find out if there's any reason they don't like any particular aspect of the rest of nature, or they've had bad stories, bad experiences, either their own or cultural. And we need to be super sensitive to this and make sure that just because we're an animal therapist, we don't want to do animal therapy with everybody. We want to make sure it's appropriate for that particular client. Okay. I sort of alluded to this. There is a difference between level 1 ecotherapy and level 2 ecotherapy. And level 1 ecotherapy is basically just using some aspect of nature just because it heals us, which is of course totally anthropocentric, totally selfish, totally me first, and totally not great. As soon as we can to develop a circle of a reciprocal circle of healing is where we want to go. So many ecotherapists, when they take people out into, let's say, a park or a forest, they pause and they ask for permission from the land, from nature, to enter that space. They don't act like we own you and we can just go in here whenever we want. So within each type of ecotherapy, we have to figure out what that asking permission might look like. It might be taking a minute and connecting with that horse or that dog or even that land, or that plant. So that's our goal in ecotherapy, is to move from level 1 to level 2. Okay. So as I mentioned, nature is the ultimate therapist. So we need nature to be healthy or we can't do our work. Hopefully this is highly motivating for all of us. And the final slide is basically that we need to take an action here. That as ecotherapists, not only should we be taking care of our clients, we also need to tend to nature's health where we practice. So we need to know about our land, our water, how is it doing, the animals, the air. We need to know how nature is where we are and to do our part in providing some healing for that nature, or we simply can't be ecotherapists. And that final shot is of the book Tending the Wild that I mentioned before, which is all about the Chumash and other indigenous peoples in California and how they have a lot to teach us about how to tend land. And I know that's true in many other places as well. So thank you for listening, and many thanks to Phoenix for helping me here.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. I learned so much. I learned a lot. I'm really struck by what you said earlier about the Chumash elder and people that you worked with, that they said they don't garden.
Isn't that amazing?
It's a completely different philosophy and way of relationship, of looking at yourself in relationship.
Yeah, it is.
In place, and that was very beautiful. I'm gonna meditate on that for myself as well. So this is like high quality, she's one of the founding elders and moving forward the field in ecotherapy. And I forgot to give thanks to the organization that made this possible. The way that I've practiced as an ecotherapist is I teach groups, and I prefer group work because I think ecotherapy is very powerful as a social and community intervention to reduce isolation. So many of us are isolated. We were isolated before COVID, before we had the shelter in place. And so I usually work with organizations. I want to give thanks to a couple of people. One is in this class now, Ellen Morrison, who's a licensed clinical social worker. I love so much. I met her 9 years ago, and I pitched to her to do an ecotherapy workshop because she was director of training at Edgewood Center for Children and Families, a large nonprofit in San Francisco that was actually, I found out the history of Edgewood connected to the land is that it was a place for orphans from the gold rush.
Wow.
Settlers came and destroyed the rivers and the waters and the land with greed for gold. A lot of them abandoned their children. And Edgewood Center for Children and Families was an orphanage. And now it is a very large nonprofit in San Francisco that serves children and youth who have been in foster care systems. It has a very robust clinical therapist program, and she was head of training. And she took a chance on me and paid me my first paid gig. Yeah, to like teach ecotherapy.
So well deserved.
Thank you. And they brought me back for like 6 years after that. And so, you know, shout out to Ellen. I love you. And then also my colleague, my friend, I don't think she's here, but Stephanie Montgomery is a manager of a program called Oakland Recast in Oakland, California, that is funded by the federal organization in the US, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Organization, also known as SAMHSA. And she took a chance on me and gave me funding to be able to provide the series for free to everyone. So I just want to, I have to give thanks to Stephanie Montgomery and Krista Griffin, who helped with all of the eBride, and that's how we're able to offer these 2 weeks for free as long as people register. So I'm very grateful for them. We now want to open it up. If you have a question or you want to talk, you know how to raise your hand through the chat or through the participant link, or just raise your hand if I see you on screen. Unmute yourself, and if you have questions for myself or Linda, let us know. One question in the chat: is it possible to share the 3 books again that you had illustrated in the beginning of the class?
What I can do is write all that down. Do we have emails available for everybody?
We do.
Okay, so we can send you that. And also, somebody asked who was the person who mentioned the $10 million person inside of us. That was Carl Jung, the the therapist in the late 1900s and early 20th century. So he was a pioneer, and depth psychology is actually a good way to interact with ecotherapy.
Here's another question. How do you see the crossover between permaculture and ecotherapy?
Oh, I thank you for asking that question. I got my training as a permaculture person, and I've been trying to convince permaculture for many years that it is a form of therapy, because I really believe it is. Luckily, there are some great people within permaculture who are developing what they call social permaculture. And that's applying the principles of permaculture to what they call the inner landscape as well as the outer landscape. So permaculture principles are based on how nature does things, and they're really useful. And then we can apply that now to the inner world and to psychology. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to chat with you about it. And there's a thing out there, I think it's on Facebook, called Women in Permaculture, or Permaculture Women, where there's a lot of discussion of these kinds of issues, applying permaculture to women's issues and psychological issues. So let's see, were there other questions that I haven't answered here?
Comments that anyone wants to make, just unmute yourself and...
I'm trying to read here at the same time.
I just see brilliant. Thank you so very much.
Oh, great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, great. Okay. I just also, as a permaculturist, wanted to comment how empowering it is to be practicing permaculture and to be caring for your own physical needs through your own acts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that is inherently empowering and grounding, just as an act within itself.
I would totally agree with that. And it's actually one of the favorite ecotherapy prescriptions I like to give young people, because so many young people right now are so depressed, understandably, by the state of the world, the planet. And getting into a permaculture design course, immediately you're with a small group of other people and everybody's gung-ho and you're learning to do things and how to survive. So if you have clients who are suffering from eco-anxiety, real fear about how they're going to survive all of this, I agree, it's a great prescription.
One of the things that I want to say, I also work in public health in the United States, in Oakland, California. I've worked in public health for 25 years. And I know that doctors are coming into the field, and some of you may be medical doctors, so please don't be offended by what I'm about to say. But one of the things that I appreciate about Howard Clinebell, who coined the term ecotherapy in his book, and Linda mentioned, is she talks about this reciprocal circle of healing. And I don't like using medical words like prescription for ecotherapy, because actually I don't want ecotherapy or nature to become medicalized. And my experience running clinics and managed clinics, doctors have knowledge, they can treat you for illnesses, but in clinics, you don't spend a lot of time with the doctor. The people that are getting to know you really, at least in the United States, I know we have people who have national health care, and you're very blessed, you know, so we're living in this archaic place where we don't have that, where you go into the doctor and you might see the doctor for 10 minutes and that's it. But here in the public health clinics that I've run, many of them, the people that have actually more time and space to really go deeper, because ecotherapy is a deep knowledge and wisdom, are social workers, healthcare workers, outreach workers, nurses, allied health professionals, and are not necessarily doctors, not the way medicine is practiced in the United States. So that is, you know, we're still growing as a field, and we welcome people. For some people, they need to hear a doctor tell them that it's good for them to do it. Okay. But in my own way of practicing and teaching and talking about it, I do not use the word prescription or at all, because I know the lobby of medicine and pharma and all of that in the United States is so influential that, you know, we can look up and there'll be the medicalization of nature. So these are some things that we're still working out, but I wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm glad you did share it. I wanted to ask you something, Phoenix. Richard Liu, you know, this last Child in the Woods guy, he uses the phrase vitamin N, that we need to get our vitamin N every day. How do you feel about that? Does that feel too medicalized?
You know, I think he's a journalist and he's good with words. And so, I mean, he wrote Nature Deficit Disorder. He's not a psychotherapist. It's not it's not an illness.
Yeah.
Right? But it is a catchy term, and it gets people aware and awake. I think it's fine if it brings people in, but again, we're so used to pathologizing. And as a Black person of African descent that lives in this country, I'm used to having myself and my body and the way I live in the world be looked at from a deficit point of view and in a pathological way. Yeah. And I prefer, as a social worker, I've been taught a strengths-based perspective. So nature deficit disorder, people think it's a medical disorder, and it's not, nor is it a mental health. But as a marketing term, yes, it got people's attention. You know, it's a good title for a book. It's a good way to get people, it's a good marketing term, but I think we have to be careful depending upon the communities that we work with. Yeah. Because Black people in America, Indigenous people in America, Latino, Latinx people in the United States, queer people in the United States, deaf people, differently abled people, we are frequently seen from a deficit point of view. And so for me, ecotherapy is empowering. It connects me to my ancestors. It helps me with, I'm really working on a strengths-based perspective. But I think it was a good marketing tool, and it's good to get people remember that, you know, they remember vitamin N. It's an easy way to remember it. Nature Deficit Disorder is it's a great title for a book.
Got it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And he's done great work, because again, you can say he's an ecotherapist, and he's not a therapist, a licensed therapist, a social worker, a medical doctor. He's a journalist. His profession is journalism, and he's has had a deep love of nature his whole life. And he talks about growing up as a young boy and how he works with his children. He's created this wonderful organization internationally known Children in Nature Network. So it shows you don't, and he's a, you know, he's the most famous eco-psychologist in North America, and he is not a therapist. So again, as Linda said, you do not have to come from a mental health background to be effective as a healer with nature.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear if people have any other ideas of different groups that could do ecotherapy that we haven't mentioned yet.
Blue Mind comes to mind. Yes, I know of that book as
Yeah,
well.
the book Blue Mind. Yeah, that's good. And any other questions anybody has? Go ahead.
I've got a suggestion of an organisation in Australia.
Uh-huh.
It's a woman who invented this fundraising race. I think it's about a 40-kilometre walk. It's I can't remember the name of it, but it's about encouraging, and particularly women and particularly mothers is her target market, because she found that women hardly spend any time outdoors and always prioritizing the needs of the family, etc., etc. So she invented this project that it's where people are raising money through their participation. They're raising money for a charity called Beyond Blue, that's a depression charity. So it's about getting people out, active in nature, together as a healing, sort of healing themselves and then raising money to heal others.
Great. That sounds good. I'd love to hear what some of you are doing if you've started your ecotherapy practice in any way, either for yourself or with other people.
I'll speak for a moment. Thank you. Hello. Hi there. So I'm a certified Qigong teacher.
Uh-huh.
And I was certified. I did my 3rd level in something called the Healer Within. So my teacher, it's, you know, I teach Qi. There are 35,000 forms of Qigong. I teach 9 of them. Okay. So my teacher, Roger Yanke, wrote a book called The Healer Within. So it's all about calming the mind, calming the body, you know, flipping the nervous system from the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight cortisol, to the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which is dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, you know, the various chemicals within, the happy hormones. So Qigong is traditionally done outdoors. I've sort of, so he has been, Roger Yanke has been working very, very closely with the VA administration. And it has now been determined, I just got back from vacation, but I got an email from him about a week ago that all VA, I believe, clinics around the country are, they must include Qigong or Tai Chi as part of their, anyone who comes in. I don't think it's just post-traumatic stress. I think it's anything. So
just for those who aren't American, the VA is the Veterans Administration.
Oh, yes, thank you. So I just find that really interesting. Is that going to be Qigong and Tai Chi outdoors? You know, probably not. But, you know, there's so much, if you go to PubMed, there's so much research, as you guys know, about, you know, exercise and meditation. So what I'm doing is I live in this beautiful part of the Hudson Valley. It's, you know, stunningly beautiful. And I take very casually, I take people on kind of like forest bathing walks, using 5 senses, listening to nature, but then incorporating my Qigong. And my, you know, I'm very much into essential oils and my tree oils, you know, eucalyptus, frankincense, beautiful northern Lakota oil from Canada. I forget the name of it, Northern Lights Black Spruce. And this, we're only 90 minutes from New York City. So this is something that's really resonating with people, and also here with people, with the kids not going to school. Like here where we live, we have remote schooling. Our schools are not open, our Waldorf schools are, because they're doing most of their classes outdoors. But people are grouping into small pods, they're calling them, and looking. I have a daughter who is an anthropologist and trained in something through Wild Earth. She's an outdoor, person, very much so primitive outdoor. And she is getting opportunities almost daily for families who are their pods, who are looking to hire people to take their kids outside, you know.
Well, thank you. I see that Catherine has posted something here. Catherine, are you there?
I've not started, but did an ecotherapy course a number of years ago. Is that you, Catherine? You want to share?
Yep, that's me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I did an ecotherapy course at Keele University many moons ago. It was a 3-day course that was working as a practitioner, incorporating ecotherapy into practice. And I focused much more on animal-assisted therapy because that was really my bag. And although I've done horticultural therapy and have grown the odd green thing, I just find that I significantly lack the confidence in it. So I've stuck to what I know and what I'm really 200% passionate about, which has always been the animal stuff. So I ended up developing my own course on animal-assisted therapy, which funnily enough was the structure was based on the course that I did on ecotherapy. And in fact, the gentleman that taught me ecotherapy was Dr. John Hegarty, who runs Blore Farm and also teaches about ecotherapy and ecopsychology at Keele University. So I've still got fingers and toes sort of connected there and don't want to disconnect absolutely. I'd just like to develop, I think, a bit more confidence and actually start doing it rather than just thinking about it, reading about it, researching about it.
Good for you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Oh, got a hand up there? I think it's Jess. Is that Jess? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? Is my microphone off?
Yes, it's you. I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, hi. I actually started the Centre for Ecotherapy in Brighton with Martin Jordan in 2014. Obviously, he's no longer with us, but anyway, I continued it. So we run social therapeutic horticulture and ecotherapy services for the community, free to user. And we run workshops, introduction to ecotherapy and introduction to social and therapeutic horticulture, which are very popular, particularly with support workers, mental health workers, and counsellors who are wanting to take their practice outside. So I feel very honoured to be working with people who are and encouraging people to take their already trained work, the work that they're already doing, but to take it outside to bring nature into their practice. And we are running weekly nature connection sessions and have been throughout lockdown, because believe very, very strongly that people need the support, people need outdoors, people need social connection. Isolation is the absolute anathema to what everybody actually needs. We need connection more than anything, and I'm determined that we will continue to do that.
Right.
And basically now trying to, we've got a bit more funding, trying to bring ecotherapy to people, young adults with learning disabilities. So that's what we're pressing forward into over the next year.
Hey, Jess, can you please put your name of your organization? Well, can you put it in the chat? Are you able to do that or no?
I'm really sorry, I haven't been able to access chat, or I would have. But we're called the Center for Ecotherapy.
I'm gonna type it in.
Yeah, if you Google us, we're centerforecotherapy.org.uk. And
okay, I put it in the box for people to see.
Oh, brilliant.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I've seen your website. Yeah.
It's center spelled with the English way, S-C-E-N-T-R-E.
Oh, yeah, that's
right.
Sorry. But yeah, if you look centerforecotherapy.org.uk into Google, you'll find us. You've got it. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much. Thank
Pleasure.
you.
We just have a few minutes left. Anybody else? Okay, looks like Nancy, yes.
Hi, excuse me, my voice. So I went through the Eco Art Therapy program with Project Connect. And so I do that. I'm also a trauma professional and I wrote a trauma workbook. And part of that is incorporating eco art therapy.
Great.
And process and talking to clients about how, especially when you're overcoming trauma and getting in touch with your body, is that our bodies are not just what we see, it's the community and nature. So inviting them to understand that they extend way past, you know, just what they see.
Yeah.
And talking to them about the trauma process and any other life process in terms of the idea and the framework of nature through, you know, diversity and calamity and cleansing and how the natural process, we mimic that and we can get teachings and learnings from that as well. And always asking nature, you know, to help and to ask for the invitation to come into that realm to also do our healing and group process.
Great, thank you.
So beautiful. Thanks for your work, Nancy.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. So we are at 3:30. We want to respect people's time, especially our friends in the UK that stayed up late to hang out with us. We appreciate you so much. And thank you. We'll be sending out an email with a list of the books that Linda talked about and a list of some other resources. Just so you know, also, I am in the process, or we are, Linda and Ellen are part of the advisory council. We're starting an alliance for ecotherapy and social justice, a new organization. And so this is part of that, and we're going to launch it in spring of 2021. But you're all on our list now, so you will be getting updates around that, and we're going to be doing more events like this. We're going to be doing some teaching and we're creating an ecotherapy and social justice certificate right now, certification. And I'm very, very just grateful to all of you and all of the work that you're doing. Jess, you're doing awesome work. I know I've been following you over the interweb, so I've been watching you. It's really great. And I just want to thank Linda again. She's such an amazing teacher and ecotherapist and a wonderful healer and elder in our field. And, you know, I want to lift her up. I'm lifting you up, Linda. So, you know, we have 2 weeks. We have another session on Wednesday, which is urban farming and working with youth and children of color. One of my friends and colleagues here in Oakland, Kelly Carlisle, who is a veteran, and she's a single mother, and she started this wonderful community garden in East Oakland, which is an area that is under-resourced, and I live in that neighborhood. And she is doing great work and is going to talk about her work with her organization called Acta Non Verba, action, not just talking. And then on Friday, I believe, my dear friend who is an Indigenous queer person, Batul Trueheart, she's a healer, a curandera, which is a traditional healer from Mexico and other parts of Latin America. And she's been doing work for a long time, helping people with their ancestors and healing with plants. She's doing a workshop on Friday. On next week, next Monday, I'm doing one on ecotherapy and the problem of whiteness, where I'm dissecting sort of the history of ecopsychology and how we need to expand it and have a multicultural view, and including my public health background in that as well. And then after my workshop, my spiritual teacher and mentor, I practice an African traditional religion called Lukumi. He is going to do a wonderful workshop on the Orisha. If you don't know who the Orisha are, Orisha, on this particular religion. It's an earth-based religion practiced by people of all races, all over the world, all over the country. We have people in the UK practicing it, not just in Africa or Cuba or Brazil as well. And that's going to be a very rich, deep workshop on eco-spirituality. Then I have another friend who's going to be doing a beautiful one called Whale Whispering. She's a singer and she's doing work with whales and listening to their songs in Brazil. Her name is Michaela Harrison, and that is a form of ecotherapy as well. So she's going to share what she's learning from the whales. She's actually there in Brazil now, and creating music with them. And then our last one the 1st of October, is Dr. Craig Chalkwis, who co-wrote Ecotherapy. He's an ecopsychologist, a professor, and he's created a form of psychology called Terra psychology, how place and where we live, how it impacts us deeply. So it's rich. We have a rich couple of weeks of other kinds of ecotherapy. So I hope you are able to register. And if not, let me know and I'll see how I can get you in. So you should all have, if you don't have my email address, I'm going to type it here. It's ecosoulwisdom, ECOSOULWISDOM @gmail.com. You can send me a message anytime, even if you just want to say, hey, what's up? That's cool as well. So yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Phoenix, for hosting us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Phoenix.
Stay on for a little bit.
I will.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get some water.
Okay.
No.
So how do you think it went, Linda?
I think it went well. I mean, people seemed pretty interested and had things to say.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I thought it was great. I haven't seen you do a full presentation before. So for me, I was taking notes and listening. I was really listening intently and learning. I learned so much. And, you know, I think that there is an opportunity for us as ecotherapists and leaders in the field to be able to, you know, it could be one of the things we do as an organization is to hold a space around the whole conversation around cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
And in a way that is healing for people, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about white people and people of European descent. It's not just, it's cultural appropriation or lack of understanding, and a term that I use, cultural humility. My friend Ellen Morrison, who was in your class, she's working with one of the founder who created the term and practice cultural humility, who's actually a doctor, a Black woman doctor.
I like that phrase.
So that's going to be an important module in the certification. And I think if we approach it from that way, instead of starting with cultural appropriation,
right,
but to create dialogues around cultural humility, I think it'll be very important, because you know, I don't want this to be what I realize. My view is very particular as a person. I'm a multicultural person. Like, I'm of African descent. My great grandfather was Mexican. My great grandmother was Native American in South Texas. But then when we did the DNA, I did my mom's DNA.
Yeah.
My DNA is, I'm almost half white.
Yeah.
Almost half European.
Wow.
It's like 45% West African,
Yeah.
30-something% Western European. I did not know, I mean, I know from slavery, but you know, I don't know, I don't have white relatives. And then I have like 5% indigenous, but that has changed my perspective about myself and around the healing that I is happening with me, with my relationship to white people.
Yeah.
So I think there's really an opportunity, because ecotherapists, we can hold a container in a different way and have a different kind of conversation around cultural humility. And also, like you have the level 1, the level 2, and the importance of the circle of the reciprocal healing is really important, because it's not just about us taking.
Right.
Like the Chumash elder, like,
yeah,
they ask permission before they tend the plant. They only take what they need. They don't take the whole plant.
exactly. Yeah.
Because as this field gets more popular, more people need it, if we're still coming from that colonizer, capitalistic mindset, we're going to be creating an ecotherapy that's just about taking.
Yeah, that's right. That's my worry. Yeah.
So that really, I really heard your wisdom there, and really helped me in thinking about, as we frame the certificate, but also as we talk about our values and principles and organization, that how do we have this nuanced and balanced conversation, because we all need healing from nature, no matter what our race, gender, ethnicity, station in life is. We all need it.
I mean, I think this is coming from the fact that we've had some really bad examples
Yeah.
of appropriation that have really upset Native people, and they've basically told us, stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I like your way of framing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more healing, but I still feel we also need to tell certain people to stop.
Yeah, we do.
Because,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, it's being presented as ecotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah.
That's why we need this organization, because we'll start to create, we'll have values and principles, we'll define what it is, we'll have standards of practice.
Exactly.
Because now, if anybody, you know, because then they'll be like, oh, well, let me look. The Alliance for Ecotherapy and Social Justice, they have these things that they've created to help guide us.
That's right. Exactly. That's a much more positive way to put it.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know whether you know Peggy, but Peggy waxed you.
Right.
She does.
Right. So I thought your presentation was just, it was very deep for me. And just the webs, the way you weave together sort of the history, and the way you talked about the different reasons why people think we are in this place. It's so many different reasons. That was beautiful.
Honestly, that could have been a whole discussion, as you can imagine. We haven't solved it.
Right.
Mess started. When did we start destroying the planet?
Right. Like you said, like what was the first one? Enslaving the plants
and the animals.
Yeah, and the animals. Yeah.
I mean, domestication. It's like first we domesticated the animals and plants, and then we domesticated ourselves.
Right.
Weird.
It is weird. It's very deep, and it broadens the conversation. And because we're a new field, we have the opportunities to have these conversations and to grow and to know that it's going to, 10 years from now, it's going to look different probably.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So we have to be open and flexible. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for doing this. I'm so happy you're doing it.
Yeah, this is brings me so much joy. I love this work. I love it.
It's a calling, I can tell.
Yeah, it is a calling. It is. Oh, let me tell you, Carolyn Baker.
Okay.
I'm working with her as a coach. She's helping me now.
All right.
You posted her book. I started reading her stuff and I felt a visceral connection because I felt this as well. When I was on the Camino last year, I had a voice tell me things are going to get worse. We need to prepare ourselves. And so I asked her, we had an assessment. I asked her about coaching, and because I'm going through so many changes, I'm taking this work to the next level. I'm working in the middle of this collapsing public health system. I'm grieving my mom, you know, and my therapist is just not, he doesn't have what I need anymore. I needed something different.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we had our first session, and I'm going to be meeting, I'm her client now every 2 weeks.
That's great.
Yeah.
Talk about elders. She's one of the elders in our field for sure.
I know. And that's the thing, like I said, I'm noticing this field, like I gravitate toward elder women anyway, but just how women, elder women specifically, are the strongest voices and who are leading, from you, Carolyn, you know, Joanna
Macy, my God, at 92, she's still going, teaching.
Right. And so I just feel that it's the women that are leading the way. And this is a field where that kind of wisdom is needed and where that kind of wisdom is creating the field.
That's right.
You know? More so women than, in my view. So it makes it also, it just makes me happy. I'm very happy. Very happy. Yeah. All right, Linda, so I'll be in touch soon.
Take care. All right. And I can send you the information for those books tomorrow.
Okay, thank you so much.
That could go in the email.
I will send it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye.